The warning signal came at 600 hours Galactic Standard Time. Commander Daeho Kim was drinking his morning coffee aboard the flagship Soul's Pride when every screen in the command center turned blood red. The ship's AI spoke in its calm female voice, but even machines could not hide the urgency of the message. Incoming transmission on all frequencies. Origin unknown. Signal strength maximum possible range. All human colonies are receiving this broadcast. Daeho put down his cup and walked to the main display. Around him, his crew stopped their morning duties and watched. The red screens flickered, then showed something that made everyone's blood run cold. 12 different alien faces appeared on the screen. Some looked like tall birds with sharp beaks. Others had too many eyes or skin that moved like liquid metal. But they all shared one thing. They looked at the camera with pure hatred. The largest alien, something that looked like a walking tree made of crystal, spoke first. Its voice was translated by human computers, but the words were clear and terrible. Attention, humans of Earth and all your scattered worlds. We are the Cytherian Empire. For 1,000 of your years, we have watched you spread like a disease across the galaxy. You take worlds that do not belong to you. You fight wars over nothing. You breed too fast and consume everything around you. Captain Minho Park was in his quarters on Luna Base when the same message reached him. He had been reading reports about new human colonies when his aide, Lieutenant Hana Yoon, burst through his door. "Sir, you need to see this right now," she said, her face pale with fear. The crystal alien continued speaking. "You are a plague species. Your very existence threatens the peace we have built over 10,000 years. Other species learn their place in the galaxy. They accept limits. They follow rules. But humans never stop. You always want more." On the mining colony of New Busan, workers stopped their machines to listen. On the research station orbiting Alpha Centauri, scientists gathered around communication screens. Every human in space heard the same terrible words. "We have tried to ignore you. We hoped you would destroy yourselves as young species often do, but you have proven too dangerous to live. You must be removed from the galaxy before you destroy everything we have built." Admiral Jiwon Lee was in an emergency meeting within an hour of the broadcast. The conference room on Luna Base filled with humanity's top military leaders, scientists, and politicians. Everyone looked scared, but they tried to hide it. "What do we know about these Cytherians?" asked President Somin Han, who had flown in from Earth as soon as the message ended. Dr. Yuna Choi, head of the Xenoarchaeology Department, stood up with a datapad in her hands. She was young for such an important job, but everyone respected her knowledge of alien cultures. "We know more than they think we do," she said, her voice steady despite the situation. "For 20 years, we have been studying ruins on the outer colonies. We found traces of dozens of dead civilizations, species that once built great cities then just disappeared." She pressed a button on her pad and images appeared on the wall screen. Ancient buildings, broken statues, empty cities on worlds that should have been full of life. At first, we thought these species died from natural disasters or wars among themselves. But 3 months ago, we found something different on Kepler 4482b. Underground archives that survived whatever destroyed the surface cities. The images changed to show strange writing carved into metal walls. The last survivors left warnings. They wrote about tall strangers who came offering peace and friendship. The strangers said they wanted to preserve the local culture and history. They built museums and libraries. Then slowly, the original people began to disappear. Colonel Hyunwoo Shin, who commanded the Marines on the outer colonies, leaned forward. "You're saying these Cytherians have done this before?" "Not just once. We found evidence of at least 50 different species that went extinct in the last 5,000 years. All in the same pattern. The Cytherians arrive, they study the local culture, they build monuments to preserve it. Then the original species vanishes." The room fell silent. Everyone understood what this meant. President Han spoke first. "How long do we have?" Admiral Lee checked her chronometer. "The message said we have 72 hours to surrender all our colonies and return to Earth. After that, they begin what they called managed extinction." "What does that mean exactly?" asked Dr. Taewon Jung, the military's top biological warfare expert. Dr. Choi answered, "Based on what we found in those archives, they will keep small populations of humans alive in controlled environments. Like animals in a zoo, they will study our culture, copy our art and technology, then add it to their museums. In 100 years, they will claim they invented everything humans ever created. The crystal alien's message had continued after the first threat. It explained how humans would be relocated to special worlds where they could live safely under Cytherian protection, how human children would be educated to serve the greater good of the galaxy, how the best examples of human culture would be preserved forever in Cytherian museums. It sounded almost kind if you did not know what happened to the other 50 species. Captain Minho Park stood up in the conference room. What are our military options? General Sang-Woo Lee, the oldest person in the room, answered with grim honesty. According to our intelligence, the Cytherian Empire controls 12 different species across 3,000 star systems. They have technology we have never seen before. Their message came from outside our galaxy, which means they can travel distances that should take us centuries. So we cannot win a normal war, President Han said. No, the general replied. We cannot. But Dr. Choi was reading something on her datapad and she looked up with a strange expression. There might be another way, she said. The archives we found were not just warnings. Some species tried to fight back. We found records of their methods. She pressed another button and new images appeared. These showed Cytherian cities, but they were burning and empty. The Vorthon species, extinct for 2,000 years, found a way to hurt the Cytherians. They could not destroy their armies or protect their worlds, but they could attack something the Cytherians value more than territory. What's that? Admiral Lee asked. Their reputation, their history, their claim to be the preservers of galactic culture. Dr. Choi's voice grew stronger. The Cytherians have built their entire empire on the lie that they are protectors and teachers. If that lie were exposed across the galaxy, their member species might not be so loyal. President Han considered this. You're talking about a propaganda war. I'm talking about something bigger than that, Dr. Choi replied. I'm talking about erasing them from history the same way they erased 50 other species. The room was quiet for a long moment. Then Admiral Lee spoke. 72 hours is not enough time to evacuate our colonies or build new weapons, but it might be enough time to prepare something they will not expect. President Han looked around the room at humanity's leaders. Are we really talking about declaring war on the most powerful empire in the galaxy? Commander Daeho Kim, who had been listening to the discussion through video link from his ship, answered for everyone. Ma'am, they already declared war on us. We're just deciding how to respond. The 72-hour deadline passed without a human surrender. Instead, something much worse happened from the Cytherian point of view. Humanity disappeared. Not completely, of course, but when the first Cytherian scout ships arrived at the outer human colonies, they found empty cities and abandoned space stations. The humans were gone, but they had left presents behind. Commander Daeho Kim watched from the Bridge of Soul's Pride as the alien ships approached New Soul Colony. His ship was hidden in the shadow of the system's largest moon, sensors barely active, waiting. Sir, the Cytherian ship is scanning the colony buildings, reported his sensor officer, Lieutenant Woojin Nam. They're sending landing parties to the main city center. Daeho smiled, but it was not a happy expression. How long until they reach the cultural center? 15 minutes, sir. Perfect. That should give them just enough time to start copying our art collections before the surprise activates. 3 star systems away, Colonel Hyunwoo Shin was leading the evacuation of Harmony Station, humanity's largest research facility outside Earth's solar system. But this was not a normal evacuation. Instead of just taking people and equipment, Shin's teams were installing something special in every building they left behind. How many more data cores do we need to plant? He asked Engineer Soman Han as they moved through the station's main laboratory. Just 12 more, sir, she replied, carefully placing a device the size of a coffee cup into the station's main computer system. Each one contains about 50 terabytes of information about Cytherian war crimes. When they try to access our research databases, they'll get a lot more than they bargained for. The device looked innocent enough. It appeared to be a standard human data storage unit. But Dr. Yuna Choi and her team had spent the last 3 days programming it with something revolutionary. They called it a cultural virus. When Cytherian systems tried to copy human databases, the virus would copy itself into their networks. Then it would start spreading, carrying with it the true history of every species the Cytherians had destroyed. The proof was all there, hidden in the ruins that Dr. Choi's teams had been studying for years. On Earth, in a secret laboratory beneath the Rocky Mountains, Dr. Taewon Young was working on a different kind of weapon. He had spent 2 sleepless days studying tissue samples from the alien broadcast. Even a video transmission carried microscopic traces of DNA, and human technology had become very good at analyzing such things. "The biology is fascinating," he told his assistant as he examined samples under a quantum microscope. "These 12 species are not naturally related to each other. Their DNA has been modified to make them compatible with Cytherian technology." "Modified how?" asked his assistant, Dr. Minji Park. "They all share the same basic immune system. It makes them resistant to each other's diseases, which is why they can live and work together across thousands of worlds." Dr. Young paused in his work and looked up with the expression that mixed excitement with horror. "But it also means they all share the same weaknesses. In space, Captain Minho Park was leading humanity's strangest military operation in history. Instead of fighting the approaching Cytherian fleets, human ships were running away from every battle. But they were not running in panic. They were running according to a carefully planned schedule. "Red Squadron, begin withdrawal from Sector 7, he ordered over the communication system. "Leave the presents as planned." The presents were small devices attached to communication satellites and space stations throughout human territory. When Cytherian ships got close enough, the devices would activate and broadcast a simple message on all frequencies. But this message was not meant for the Cytherians. Captain Nari Song commanded the fastest ship in the human fleet, a scout vessel called Dancing Wolf. Her mission was more dangerous than anyone else's. While other captains were retreating, she was heading straight into Cytherian space. "Target acquired," she told her crew as they approached a large space station orbiting a red giant star. "This is Archive Station Keth 7, one of their main cultural repositories. According to our intelligence, it contains copied histories from at least 20 extinct species." The station was lightly defended because the Cytherians never expected anyone to attack their cultural centers. They saw themselves as teachers and preservers, not soldiers. This mistake would cost them dearly. Song's ship slipped past the few guard vessels using human stealth technology. Within hours, her team had infiltrated the station's computer systems and begun downloading everything they could find. "Commander, you need to see this," said her technical officer, Sungmin Oh. His face was pale as he read through the stolen data. "These aren't just copies of extinct species cultures. These are instruction manuals." "Instructions for what?" "How to destroy a species while making it look natural. How to turn their own people against them. How to make them grateful for their own extinction." Seungmin's hands shook as he transferred the files. "There are detailed plans for humans in here, dated 3 months ago. They call it Project Final Garden." The plan was worse than anyone had imagined. The Cytherians did not simply conquer species and take their worlds. They studied each species for decades, learning their psychology and culture. Then they crafted specific methods to make each species choose their own destruction. For humans, the plan involved introducing a plague that would slowly reduce human fertility over several generations. Human parents would have fewer and fewer children, but it would happen so gradually that they would think it was their own choice. Meanwhile, Cytherian helpers would offer to raise human children in special schools, where they would learn to serve the Empire. Within 2 centuries, humans would be extinct, but they would die grateful to their Cytherian protectors for preserving their culture. Back on New Sol Colony, the first Cytherian soldiers had reached the cultural center. They were tall, graceful beings who moved like dancers as they examined human artwork and historical displays. Their scanner devices recorded everything, preparing to add human culture to their vast collection. Then they tried to access the main cultural database. The cultural virus activated immediately. Instead of human poetry and music, the Cytherian systems received detailed documentation of genocide. Video recordings of species being led to their deaths, communications between Cytherian leaders planning the destruction of entire civilizations, scientific reports on the effectiveness of different extinction methods. But the virus did more than just show them information. It began rewriting their cultural databases, replacing stolen histories with the truth about where those cultures had really come from. Within hours, the virus had spread to the Cytherian command ship in orbit. Within days, it would reach other Cytherian worlds through their own communication networks. Admiral Jiwan Lee watched the progress reports from her command center on Luna Base. Across human space, the retreat was going according to plan. Cytherian forces were occupying abandoned human colonies, but every world they captured became infected with the truth about their empire's history. "How are the biological weapons progressing?" she asked Dr. Young during their daily briefing. The first batch will be ready in 72 hours, he replied. We've identified 12 different pathogens, each designed to target one of the Catherian member species. They're engineered to be highly contagious but not fatal immediately. The goal is to make their entire alliance sick at the same time. And the cultural virus? Dr. Choi answered from her workstation. Spreading faster than we hoped. We've confirmed penetration of 17 Catherian archive worlds. Their own historians are starting to ask questions about inconsistencies in their records. But the most important part of humanity's response was still secret. In deep space, far from any star, construction crews were building something that would ensure human survival, even if Earth itself was destroyed. General Sang-Woo Lee supervised the construction of Phoenix Base, a massive space station designed to house 10 million people, and everything needed to rebuild human civilization. But Phoenix Base was just the largest of 50 such stations scattered throughout the galaxy. If they want to erase us from history, the general told his staff, we'll make sure that's impossible. Even if they destroy every human world, we'll still be out here, ready to tell the galaxy the truth about what they've done. The Catherian Empire had declared war, expecting to face a young species armed with primitive weapons and simple strategies. Instead, they found themselves fighting an enemy that attacked their past, their present, and their future all at the same time. Humanity's response was not just military, it was existential. They were not fighting to win territory or negotiate a treaty. They were fighting to ensure that the truth would survive, even if humanity itself did not. The war had begun, but it would not be the kind of war anyone expected. 6 months into the war, Major Junho Lim stood on the burning surface of Catheria Prime, the Empire's oldest colony world. Around him, ancient temples that had stood for 10,000 years were melting under human plasma bombardment. But Junho was not watching the destruction. He was reading. "Sir, we need to move," said Sergeant Kyung-ho Park, his voice tight with urgency through the helmet communicator. "Their reinforcements will be here in 20 minutes. "Just a few more minutes," Junho replied, his eyes fixed on the alien text carved into a temple wall. Dr. Choi was right. This isn't their culture at all. The writing told the story of the Veltar, a peaceful species that had built these temples 3,000 years ago. The carving showed them as tall, slender beings with 4 arms who had worshipped the stars and created beautiful art. The last carving showed them welcoming tall strangers who promised to help preserve their culture forever. After that, the carvings stopped. Juno placed explosive charges at the base of the temple wall. When it fell, it would reveal the truth buried beneath 10,000 years of lies. Other human teams were doing the same thing across the planet, exposing the real history that the Catherians had tried to bury. In space above the planet, Captain Nari Song watched the surface burn from the bridge of her ship, now called Truthbearer. Her original vessel had been destroyed 2 months ago, but she had survived and been given a new command. Her mission had not changed: find Catherian cultural sites and reveal their secrets before destroying them. "Any word from the infiltration teams?" she asked her communications officer. "Yes, ma'am. Lieutenant Hana Yoon's team has successfully downloaded the archives from the Capitol Museum. She reports finding evidence of 15 more extinct species on this world alone." Song nodded grimly. Every Catherian world they attacked revealed the same pattern. Beautiful cities built on graveyards, museums filled with stolen art, libraries containing the dying words of murdered civilizations. But the human attacks were having an unexpected effect. Other species in the galaxy were starting to pay attention. Dr. Yoonji Kim coordinated the information war from a hidden base in an asteroid field. Her team of hackers and historians worked around the clock, broadcasting the truth about Catherian crimes to every corner of the galaxy. "The Altarian Republic has cut diplomatic ties with the Catherian Empire," reported her assistant, Sungmin Oh. "They're demanding an investigation into the fate of their neighboring species." "What about the Zorvan hegemony?" asked Dr. Kim. "Still officially neutral, but their public broadcasts are starting to ask questions. 3 of their member worlds have requested copies of our historical documentation." The galaxy was slowly waking up to the truth. For thousands of years, smaller species had assumed that their neighbors simply died out naturally, or moved to distant worlds. The Catherians had been careful to spread their genocides across centuries, making each extinction seem like an isolated event. But now humanity was connecting the dots, and the pattern was impossible to ignore. Admiral Jiho Kwan commanded the human fleet that broke the siege of Proxima Station, humanity's most important military base outside the solar system. The battle had lasted 3 days and cost thousands of lives on both sides. As he walked through the damaged corridors of the station, stepping over debris and fallen soldiers, he received a report that made his blood run cold. "Sir, we've received confirmation from the medical teams," said Commander Daeho Kim, who had fought his way to the station aboard. "Soul's Pride. The biological weapons are working better than expected. The human-designed plagues had been spreading through Catherian space for 2 months. They were not meant to be quickly fatal, but rather to cause long-term illness that would strain the Empire's resources. However, something unexpected had happened. The Catherian member species are starting to blame each other for the outbreaks," continued Daiho. "Their medical systems weren't designed to handle 12 different plagues at once. Some worlds are quarantining themselves from their own allies. But the most disturbing news came from Dr. Taewon Jung's latest report. The biological weapons were mutating as they spread, becoming more deadly than originally planned. Entire Catherian worlds were falling silent. Are we becoming the monsters we're fighting?" asked Admiral Kwan. Before anyone could answer, they received an emergency communication from Lieutenant Woojin Nam, who was leading a reconnaissance mission in the Catherian capital system. "All human ships, this is Recon 7. I'm transmitting footage from Catheria Central. You need to see this." The images that appeared on their screens showed the Catherian Empire's capital world, but instead of the proud, shining cities they expected, they saw chaos. Catherian civilians were rioting in the streets. Government buildings were burning. The different member species of the Empire were fighting each other. "The cultural virus has reached their central archives," reported Nam. "Their own people are learning the truth about their history. The Empire is falling apart from within." Dr. Yuna Choi watched the reports from her research station on a captured Catherian world. Around her, teams of human scientists were carefully documenting the ruins of another extinct civilization. These people had been called the Marathek, and they had created some of the most beautiful architecture in the galaxy before the Catherians arrived.
"How many does that make?"
asked her assistant as they uncovered more evidence of Catherian genocide. 67 confirmed extinct species," replied Dr. Choi, "and we've only searched about 20% of their territory." The number was staggering. The Catherians had not just conquered an empire, they had committed genocide on a scale that was almost incomprehensible. Billions of beings from dozens of worlds, all murdered so that the Catherians could steal their cultures and claim their achievements. But something else was happening that even Dr. Choi had not expected. As the truth spread across the galaxy, some of the extinct species were not staying extinct. "Ma'am, you should see this," said Lieutenant Minho Park, who was coordinating with alien refugee groups throughout the sector. "We've been contacted by survivors." "Survivors of what?" "The Veltar, the species that built those temples on Catheria Prime. Turns out the Catherians didn't kill all of them. Small groups escaped to hidden worlds and have been surviving in secret for 3,000 years. Similar reports were coming in from across the galaxy. The Catherians had been thorough in their genocides, but not perfect. Many species had hidden survivors who had been afraid to reveal themselves until now. As humanity's war against the Catherian Empire spread across 3 spiral arms of the galaxy, these survivor groups began to emerge from hiding. They brought with them not only their own stories of survival, but also detailed knowledge of Catherian methods and weaknesses. The war was no longer just humanity against the Catherian Empire. It was becoming a galaxy-wide reckoning with thousands of years of hidden genocide. Colonel Hyun-Woo Shin led a joint human-alien assault on the Catherian fortress world of Tormesh. Fighting alongside him were Veltar refugees who had spent 3,000 years planning their revenge, Marathek survivors who remembered their murdered homeworld, and representatives from a dozen other species that the galaxy had thought extinct. "This is for everyone they murdered," said Elder Vashati of the Veltar as they prepared to assault the fortress. "This is for everyone they erased from history." The battle was fierce, but the Catherians were not fighting with their usual coordination. The biological weapons had weakened them, the cultural virus had shattered their unity, and the revelation of their crimes had turned their former allies against them. When the fortress fell, the victors found something that made even hardened human marines sick with rage. In the deepest vaults beneath the fortress, They discovered thousands of stasis pods containing the last survivors of extinct species. The Catherians had been keeping them alive as living exhibits, displaying them to visitors as examples of primitive species we helped preserve. "How long have they been in there?" asked Colonel Shin. Dr. Young, who had joined the assault to study Catherian biological systems, checked the pod's monitoring systems. "Some of these have been running for over 1,000 years, he said, his voice barely controlled. "They've been keeping entire families in suspended animation as museum pieces." The discovery changed everything. The war was no longer about preventing humanity's extinction or revealing historical crimes. It had become a rescue mission on a galactic scale. As human forces pushed deeper into Catherian space, they found more stasis facilities. Thousands of beings from dozens of species, preserved like specimens while their entire civilizations were murdered and their cultures stolen. The galaxy watched in horror and rage as the full scope of Catherian crimes was revealed. The empire that had presented itself as the protector of galactic culture was exposed as its greatest destroyer. And in the depths of space, human construction crews worked frantically to build facilities to house the rescued survivors. The Phoenix Project had expanded far beyond ensuring human survival. It had become a mission to resurrect entire civilizations from the edge of extinction. The Catherian Empire's greatest fear was coming true. The dead were returning to tell their stories. The Catherian Empire's final move came without warning. General Sangwoo Lee was reviewing reports from the rescue operations when every human communication system in the galaxy screamed the same emergency alert. "All human forces, all colonies, all stations. This is Fleet Command. Stellar killer weapons detected approaching Sol system. Repeat, they are targeting our sun." The message was simple and terrifying. If the Catherians could not defeat humanity in normal battle, they would destroy Earth's sun and murder everyone in the solar system. 5 billion humans would die, along with the birth world that had given rise to their species. But humanity had been preparing for this moment since the war began. "Activate Phoenix Protocol," ordered Admiral Jiwan Lee from her command center on Luna Base. "All deep space stations, begin emergency procedures. All sleeping populations, begin awakening procedures." This is not a drill. Across the galaxy, hidden human bases that had been waiting in dark space suddenly came alive. Millions of humans who had been sleeping in cryogenic chambers began waking up. Entire cities that had been built in secret started powering up their systems. The Phoenix Protocol was humanity's ultimate insurance policy. Even if Earth and every known human colony were destroyed, these hidden populations would survive to carry on their species and their mission. Dr. Minji Park worked frantically in her laboratory on Phoenix Base Alpha, the largest of the secret stations. Around her, computers that had been calculating for months were finalizing their most ambitious project yet. "Is it ready?" asked Dr. Yuna Choi, who had been evacuated from the war zone when the stellar killers were detected. "The quantum virus is complete," replied Dr. Park. "But I have to warn you, if we deploy this, there might be no going back." The quantum virus was unlike any weapon ever created. Instead of attacking computers or biology, it attacked information itself. Using quantum entanglement, it could reach backward through time to corrupt historical records at the moment they were created. "If we activate this, every Catherian historical record will begin unraveling," explained Dr. Park. "Not just the files we can access now, but files from their entire history. Their culture will literally disappear from existence." Commander Daeho Kim, now commanding a fleet of refugee ships evacuating Earth, listened to the conversation through emergency communication link. "How long until the stellar killers reach Sol?" he asked. 36 hours, replied his navigation officer, Lieutenant Wu Jin Nam. "And how long to evacuate Earth?" The silence that followed was answer enough. There were 5 billion people on Earth and not nearly enough ships to move them all in 36 hours. But the evacuation was not the only plan in motion. Captain Nari Song commanded a squadron of human ships that had been modified with captured Catherian technology. Their mission was to intercept the stellar killer weapons before they could reach Earth's sun. "Target acquired," reported her tactical officer as they approached the massive Catherian weapon. The stellar killer was the size of a moon, covered with devices that could destabilize a star's nuclear reactions. Beginning attack run. The battle was desperate and one-sided. Human ships were fast and clever, But the stellar killer had escorts and defenses that outmatched anything humanity had built. Song's squadron fought with the fury of people defending their homeworld, but one by one her ships were destroyed. "Truth-bearer to all human forces," she broadcast as enemy fire tore through her ship's hull. "Stellar killer is damaged but still operational. Estimate 6 hours until it reaches firing position." Then her ship exploded in a flash of nuclear fire. On Phoenix Base Alpha, Dr. Park received authorization to deploy the quantum virus. The decision came directly from President Salman Khan, who was aboard one of the evacuation ships fleeing Earth. "Do it," came the order. "If we're going to die, we'll make sure they're forgotten forever." Dr. Park activated the quantum virus with a simple keystroke. Across the galaxy, Catherian archives began experiencing what their scientists could only describe as temporal corruption. Historical records started changing, not just recent files, but ancient ones that had been stored for thousands of years. The effect was immediate and devastating. On Catherian worlds, museum displays began showing empty spaces where stolen artifacts had been documented. Library computers crashed as they tried to access files that were simultaneously existing and not existing. But the quantum virus did more than just corrupt data. It began rewriting history to match the truth that humanity had discovered. Elder Vashti of the Veltar watched from a refugee ship as the virus reached the Catherian capital world. On screens throughout the ship, they could see Catherian news broadcasts reporting massive system failures. "Their people are learning the truth about their own history for the first time," she told the human officers around her. "Our stories, our real stories, are appearing in their archives. The murders they committed are being documented in their own files." The psychological effect on the Catherian population was catastrophic. Imagine discovering that everything you believed about your civilization was a lie, that your proud history of cultural preservation was actually a record of genocide, that every museum in your empire was filled with grave goods stolen from murdered species. On the Catherian capital world, riots broke out as different species began blaming each other for the crimes that were being revealed. The empire that had been united for 10,000 years began tearing itself apart in a matter of hours. But even as their civilization collapsed around them, the Catherian military pressed forward with their plan to destroy Earth's sun. Major Junho Lim led the last desperate mission to stop the stellar killer. His team had managed to capture a Catherian transport ship and were approaching the weapon disguised as a supply convoy. "Remember, we only get one chance at this," he told his team as they prepared to board the stellar killer. "The reactor core is heavily shielded, but if we can overload the quantum matrix, the whole thing should tear itself apart." The mission was a suicide run, and everyone knew it. But as they made their way through the stellar killer's corridors, fighting past automated defenses and alien guards, they discovered something that changed everything. The weapon was not just designed to destroy stars. It was designed to harvest the energy from stellar destruction and use it to power even larger weapons. The Catherians were not just planning to kill humanity. They were planning to sterilize entire sectors of the galaxy. "Command, this is Major Lim," he broadcast as his team reached the weapons control center. "The stellar killer is just the beginning. They have plans to destroy hundreds of star systems. Every species that has learned the truth about their crimes is marked for extinction." The control center contained detailed files about the Catherian Empire's true plan. Faced with the collapse of their reputation and the rebellion of their member species, they had decided to kill everyone who knew their secrets. Humanity, the surviving refugees from extinct species, even their own former allies who had turned against them, all were marked for death. Lieutenant Woojin Nam, who had survived the destruction of his ship and made it aboard the stellar killer, worked frantically to copy the files while Major Lim's team prepared to destroy the weapon. "Got it," he reported. "Complete battle plans, target lists, everything. The galaxy needs to see this." As the human team prepared their final assault on the stellar killer's reactor, they received an unexpected message from the Catherian command center. The voice was translated by their equipment, but the words were clear. It was a surrender offer. "Human forces, this is Catherian High Command. We propose immediate ceasefire and negotiations. We are prepared to discuss terms for peaceful coexistence." Major Lim looked at his team, then at the stellar killer's controls that could destroy his homeworld with the press of a button. "What do you think?" asked one of his soldiers. Lim thought about the stasis pods full of living museum exhibits. About the 67 extinct species whose cultures had been stolen. About the children who had been taken from their families and raised as servants. About the lies that had been told for thousands of years. I think, he said, placing charges around the reactor core, that it's too late for negotiations. The stellar killer exploded in a burst of energy that lit up half the solar system. The weapon designed to murder Earth's sun instead became a firework celebrating its survival, but the war was not over. Across the galaxy, other Cytherian weapons were still active, other Cytherian fleets were still fighting, and millions of beings were still trapped in stasis pods waiting to be rescued. The reckoning had only just begun. Dr. Yoonji Kim broadcast the captured Cytherian files to every corner of the galaxy, the plans for mass extinction, the lists of species marked for death, the cold calculations about how to murder entire civilizations efficiently. Let everyone see, she told her team as they transmitted the data. Let everyone know what we're really fighting against. The galaxy's response was swift and decisive. Species that had remained neutral in the human-Cytherian conflict suddenly declared war on the Empire. Ancient alliances crumbled as the Cytherians' former friends realized they were also on the extermination list. What had begun as humanity's desperate fight for survival had become the galaxy's war for justice. 50 years after the first Cytherian transmission threatened humanity with extinction, Captain Johan Kim stood on the observation deck of his exploration vessel, Busan's light, and looked out at the graveyard of an empire. The space around him was filled with dead worlds orbiting dying stars. Planets that had once held billions of Cytherian citizens now showed no signs of life. Their cities were empty ruins. Their oceans were poisoned wastelands, and their skies were dark with the smoke of civilizations that would never rise again. Any signs of survivors on the surface? Asked his second officer, Lieutenant Soyeon Jang. None, replied the ship's science officer, Dr. Kyung-ho Park. The biological weapons burned themselves out 20 years ago, but the damage was complete. This entire system is dead. Johan nodded sadly. He had been just a child when the war began, growing up on one of the Phoenix stations while humanity fought for its survival. Now he was an adult, part of the generation tasked with cleaning up the aftermath of the most destructive war in galactic history. The Cytherian Empire had not surrendered. Even as their member species abandoned them and their colonies fell to human bioweapons, they had fought to the bitter end. When it became clear that their empire was doomed, they had turned their weapons on themselves rather than face judgment for their crimes. Captain, we're receiving a transmission from the Memorial Station, reported the communications officer. The Memorial Station was humanity's greatest construction project since the Phoenix bases. Built from the wreckage of Cytherian ships in the ruins of their capital system, it served as both a monument to their victims and a warning to future generations. This is Admiral Minji Park, came the voice over the communication system. She was the daughter of Dr. Minji Park, the scientist who had created the quantum virus that brought down the Cytherian archives. We've just received confirmation from the archaeology teams on Veltar Prime. The restoration is complete. Johan smiled for the first time in weeks. The restoration project was the most ambitious undertaking in galactic history. Using the surviving Cytherian records and the testimony of refugee species, human scientists were rebuilding entire civilizations from the edge of extinction. Veltar Prime had been the homeworld of Elder Vashati's people, destroyed by the Cytherians 3,000 years ago. Now, using genetic samples and cultural archives, humanity had brought the dead world back to life. Trees that had been extinct for millennia grew in reconstructed forests. Cities built according to ancient architectural plans rose from the ruins of Cytherian settlements. And most importantly, the Veltar people themselves were returning home. Dr. Soyeon Jang, who had taken over the Great Restoration Project from her predecessors, worked from a laboratory built into the Memorial Station. Around her, scientists from dozens of species worked to bring back the dead. How many species have we successfully restored to viability? Asked her assistant, Dr. Dongyun Choi. 43 so far, she replied, checking her data screens. We have enough genetic and cultural material to restore another 37, but it will take decades of work. The process was incredibly complex. It was not enough to simply clone extinct species and give them planets to live on. Each species had to be taught their own history, their own customs, their own languages. Entire cultures had to be rebuilt from fragments and memories. But humanity was not doing this work alone. The survivor species that had hidden from the Catherians for thousands of years were sharing their knowledge. Even some of the former Catherian member species, horrified by the truth about their empire, had joined the restoration effort. Captain Johann Kim's mission was to survey the dead Catherian worlds and determine which ones could be given to restored species as new homeworlds. It was grim work, flying through system after system of lifeless planets, but it was necessary. "Captain, we're approaching the Catheria Prime system," reported his navigator, the one that started it all. Catheria Prime was where Major Junho Lim had first uncovered the truth about Catherian genocide 50 years ago. The world where ancient temples had hidden the real history beneath layers of lies. Now it was a monument to the price of those lies. The planet's surface was covered with structures that had not been there during the war. Massive towers of black metal rose from every continent, carved with the names and histories of extinct species. These were not Catherian monuments claiming credit for preserving culture. These were human-built memorials honoring the victims of genocide. "The inscription on the central monument is visible from orbit," reported Dr. Park, reading from his sensors. "It says, 'Here lie the memories of the murdered. Their killers are forgotten. Their stories will live forever.'" The central monument was built on the site of the Catherian capital city. It contained the complete historical records of every species the Empire had destroyed, along with artistic reconstructions of their cultures and scientific recreations of their worlds. But it also contained something else, the true history of the Catherians themselves. Elder Vashti, now ancient but still sharp, had insisted that the memorial include the real story of their enemies. Not the heroic mythology the Catherians had created about themselves, but the actual historical record of a species that had destroyed their own homeworld through environmental disasters, then spent thousands of years destroying other worlds to hide their shame. They were not monsters, she had said during the memorial's dedication ceremony. They were cowards, and history will remember them as such. Admiral Minji Park toured the memorial station with a group of young humans who had been born after the war ended. They were part of the new generation that would inherit the galaxy humanity had fought to save. "Why did the Catherians choose genocide instead of simply conquering other species?" asked one of the students. "Because conquest leaves witnesses," replied Admiral Park. "If they had simply enslaved other species, those species could have eventually rebelled or escaped. But if they murdered entire civilizations and stole their cultures, they could claim credit for everything those species had ever achieved." She led the students to a display showing the scope of Catherian crimes. The holographic map showed hundreds of star systems, each one marking a species that had been driven extinct. "They did not just kill people," she continued. "They killed history itself. When a species went extinct, all of their stories, their art, their scientific discoveries, their ways of understanding the universe, all of that became Catherian property." One of the students asked the question that haunted everyone who studied the war. "Are we any different? We destroyed their entire empire. We made sure their culture would be forgotten. Doesn't that make us just like them?" Admiral Park had been asked this question many times over the years. She always gave the same answer. "There is one crucial difference. We preserved the truth. Every Catherian world we conquered, every archive we captured, every piece of evidence we found, all of it is here, in this memorial. Their real history, their actual achievements, even their crimes are all recorded for future generations to study." She gestured to another section of the memorial, one that most visitors found disturbing. "We even preserved their final messages, their last desperate attempts to justify what they had done. Because the truth, all of it, is more important than revenge." The memorial contained detailed records of the Catherian Empire's final days, messages from their leaders trying to rally their people, reports from their scientists attempting to create new weapons, personal diaries from ordinary Catherian citizens as they realized what their empire had really been built on. It was a complete record of a civilization's collapse, preserved not to celebrate its destruction, but to understand how such evil could arise and how it could be prevented in the future. Dr. Donghyun Choi worked in the deepest levels of the memorial station, in archives that most people never saw. His job was to catalog and preserve everything that had been recovered from Catherian territory, no matter how disturbing. "We have confirmed the existence of 12 more stasis facilities," he reported during the weekly staff meeting. Estimated total, 8,000 beings from 15 different species. These were the hardest discoveries to deal with. Even 50 years after the war ended, human teams were still finding Catherian facilities where living beings had been kept in suspended animation as museum exhibits. Each discovery brought the same terrible questions. How long had they been sleeping? Did they remember their families, their worlds, their cultures? Could they be integrated into the restoration projects? Or had they been imprisoned so long that they were no longer mentally capable of freedom? The psychological rehabilitation programs are showing good results, reported Dr. Choi. About 70% of rescued individuals eventually recover enough to participate in their species restoration efforts. The other 30% remained in human care, their minds too damaged by centuries of imprisonment to ever fully heal. They lived in special facilities where human caregivers tried to give them as much peace and dignity as possible. Captain Johan Kim completed his survey of the former Catherian territory and submitted his final report. Of the 3,000 worlds that had belonged to the Empire, fewer than 50 showed any signs of life. The biological weapons had been more effective,